Hey, speaking of hoping, are you falling for this Sam Darnold thing?
No, no, no. I had my time on the Sam Darnold narcotic. Okay, like
Oh, you did?
I did because I wasn't a fan of him coming out of USC, and then I moved here to New York and I was covering the Jets and the Giants for the Daily News, and I was out there at practice, and like Sam's one of those quarterbacks. Like if you were just to cut up his 10 best throws and put it against and just put it against any other quarterback, you would say, damn, like this might be a Pro Bowler, someone who's got elite talent. And then you watch the whole game and you're like, it's like watching someone with amnesia play quarterback sometimes, because he will just like, he'll turn down a covered route and then he'll get the same look where it's covered and just throw it right to a defender. That Sam is still there. Like if you go back and you watch this game against the 49ers, I know Fred Warner got one. I think Fred Warner also had 2 forced fumbles. He was a maniac on Sunday. But Darnold's like, he's throwing it up for grabs and they just aren't coming down with it yet. Luckily for him, he's got the ecosystem where he can kind of survive some of these mistakes. Kevin O'Connell's one of the better offensive coaches in the league. Justin Jefferson, don't need to explain that. The offensive line's solid. Aaron Jones still has some juice. So this situation is a lot better than any spot he's been put in before. But man, you watch the game, that's still Sam Darnold. Still Sam Darnold. No one just hasn't, they just haven't been paid enough yet.
Well, I will say on one level, I was down on Sam Darnold coming out of USC also. I never bought it. But on the other hand, I was down on him. And I was absolutely sold on Josh Rosen. I can't think of anything that I've been wrong about quite the way I was wrong about him. Like you can make the argument on the other side that I was wrong about Josh Allen, but that's not correct. I was right about Josh Allen until I was not right. I was always wrong about Josh Rosen. The second he got a foot, they drafted him and then drafted a 5'11" or 5'10" dude to replace him the next year. They hired a whole ass coach to replace him.
And right before they replaced him, Cliff Kingsbury said, Josh is our guy. Knowing damn well He did not mean that. That was one of those situations where you say what you got to say to get the job and then do whatever the fuck you want once those paychecks start coming in. That's exactly what Cliff did, because he got to that draft and said, you see that shit last year? No. And they traded Josh to the Dolphins on day 2.
But here's where I kind of disagree though. And I think that he did what he was hired to do. I don't think that you can walk the GM off of his quarterback just because you hear Suge White did what look, as bad as Josh Rosen proved to be, I can only assume that they knew like that. And that's again why I look at David Tepper in a way where it's like, yeah, I get that he's pulling the plug on these things, but the things he's pulling the plugs on are things that need their plugs pulled. At least it's appeared to be thus far.
Right. And I'll agree with that. But like what you said before.
Yeah, but he's always got to unplug his shit.
Always making the wrong moves.
Right. Like why is everything you buy a fire hazard?
The Josh Rosen thing just made me think about during that season just how sad Steve Wilkes would look on the sideline because he knew what was coming. Like there was a game late that season where the Falcons played them, and the Falcons were not a good team that year, and they beat the brakes off the Cardinals. Every time they point the camera to Steve Wilkes, he's like, "Man, I got about 2 weeks left here. 2 weeks, and I'm out of here."
Steve Wilkes, or as I like to call him, Clarence Williams the Fourth.
Oh man, dude,
they had Suge White as their general manager and Clarence Williams the Fourth as their head coach. Somebody put that side to side together. Is right there. Also, last thing, well, maybe not the last thing, but we coming toward the end, so I'll call it last thing, if only for decorative purposes. How high are you on CJ Stroud?
Oh, he's amazing. He's amazing. Like I think it's tough like to rank guys because I prefer to put them in tiers because I think it's easier just to say like these guys are all kind of the same and then like here's Mahomes up here. But like he's inching into like that second tier. Like to me it's like Mahomes, then there's Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, and CJ seems like every week like he's getting closer to that tier 2 elite quarterback status. And the thing that's interesting with CJ is like, dude, it just looks so easy for him. And he had questions coming out of Ohio State where it's like, hey, he's playing with a bunch of 5-stars. This is going to be a lot harder in the NFL for him. And he landed in a good spot. But no, he's that dude. Like, you don't go out and get a Stephon Diggs unless you have a CJ Stroud. You don't extend Nico Collins to all that money if you don't have a CJ Stroud. He is the engine that makes all of this go for the Texans. And I think that what's also funny about CJ is he kind of appears to be a little bit of an anomaly as far as like the recent young quarterbacks we've seen enter the league, because he hit the ground running, and there's been a bit of a lull over the past few years and guys just hitting the ground running like CJ has, because you start looking around, it's like, as far as the rookies and second-year quarterbacks, he has no peers in terms of his play on the field or his production, really.
I was sold on him at Ohio State. Like, those playoff games, especially that game against Georgia. I was like, oh, okay. Now, because he was in this weird space where he was like the answer to a trivia, like a Black History trivia question, because the whole complaint was about how he doesn't run enough. And I'm like, oh, so now you want us to run more? Oh, okay, right? Like, okay. So now he's a drop back passer that doesn't run enough for you. This is how the racial pendulum has swung in the football thing, right? And I was like, but then in that game against Georgia, he showed he could move. That just wasn't what he was doing. So what I find to be so fascinating about this is, as we recall, we didn't think he was going to be drafted by the Texans. He didn't think that he was going to be drafted by the Texans. And then the Texans, who the word was were trying to move up to get Bryce Young, no, boom, wound up there. We thought they were the worst, okay? None of us a year and change ago had a good word to say about that franchise, DeMeco Ryans or not. We had nothing good to say about that franchise. They made that trade in that draft to get Will Anderson, and we all thought it was a bad trade, but the only reason we all thought it was a bad trade is we were sure they were going to be taking in the top 5 again. They weren't taken in the top 5 again. They went to the playoffs, and so you got Will Anderson for a future late first-round pick. The trade we thought was awful became indisputably great because Will Anderson seems to be panning out, right? How I think we got here with quarterbacks, and I don't know how this ties to Stroud directly, but I wanted to get to this. Cam Newton is, to me, is the paradigm changer, where you had to draft a quarterback number 1 overall who was just running a high school offense. It's not his fault he was just running a high school offense, but you had to draft him and you had to figure out what the game was that you could play with his understanding of playing quarterback at that time. So how are we going to do this? And he can go. And so they brought in all the read option stuff, everything else. I've had things that people had told me about, like what the Panthers had said for him to do in order to get by, but he was excellent. Sam Bradford the year before was the first spread quarterback to go number 1, and then Cam Newton. And then we started seeing, because of the way they were teaching football, they started introducing these simpler concepts to quarterback and for the offenses. Started putting in the RPOs, putting in the read options, all this other stuff. They weren't having to do nearly as much stuff. And Tom Brady did that interview where he was like, look, they sit these guys down and let them learn how to run an offense, and they're doing them a disservice by throwing them out there. What it seems to me is happening, or the hypothesis that I want tested, the defenses has caught up to that paradigm change in the offense. Right? And now that the defenses have caught up, it's too high on everything. You're going to have to nickel and dime to death. You're going to have to really figure out what's going on underneath. These cats ain't learned how to do that. And so what's happening is, I think the game is going back to where it was where I was growing up, where you draft a quarterback and you sit him for a year. You may even sit him for 2 years, but you don't have to rush to play him. The issue is that is from an era that precedes the salary cap in these 5-year contracts, and these teams feel like they need answers early. My argument is you only need to answer in year 3. Whatever your year 3 answer is going to wind up being your, however it goes. But no, I think it's going to be like this for every other quarterback that we throw out here. Caleb Williams, who we thought was the future, Caleb Williams looked good and sorry so far. I can't believe they all sorry though.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. And I've seen a lot of people talk about the quarterback discussion and why passing yards and passing production is so down this year. I think that, one of the things that kind of got underappreciated with like that turn from like late 2010s to early 2020s was like, we had a microwaved quarterback golden era, because you take it to 2017, you get Tom Brady, they lose to the Eagles, but Tom Brady's an old guy. He's still making plays in the Super Bowl. 2018, Patrick Mahomes' first year as a starter wins the MVP. 2019, Lamar Jackson, first year as a starter, wins the MVP. 2020, Tom Brady ring number 7. So like you have an overlap where not only Tom Brady was playing well, but that's where like you saw still some peak Drew Brees before he declined. Phillip Rivers was still playing well. Now it's just the young guys. And outside of like the anomaly of like a Mahomes and Lamar and Josh Allen developing as quickly as they did, turning into bona fide franchise quarterbacks, this is probably more what we should get used to. Like the NFL is hard. There's a lot of young quarterbacks. Defense have gotten better. And I think one of the most telling stats that I looked at the other day was sack percentage this year using Pro Football References numbers is almost up a full percentage point from last year. It was 7.1 last year. We're at 7.8 this year, which is a big, big jump in terms of like how many negative plays we're seeing on the offensive end. I think it's a little bit of everything. It's not one big thing, but it's defense, it's young players. They're not really getting prepared at the college level, and this is what you have. You just have to wait it out and see what happens.
There was a quarterbacking wasteland. I've talked about this. It's been a while. I want to make sure I get this right. If you look really in sum total from the years 2006 through 2017, 18, that's the wasteland. Period. The guys that,
right.
So you get Matt Ryan, and Matt Ryan won an MVP, right? So like, let's be clear. Matt Ryan will have his number retired by the Atlanta Falcons. He had a very good career, but Matt Ryan was not a superstar. Okay. Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl, but we're saying very similar things about him also in that place. 2009 is Matt Stafford. Don't get me started on this one. It's I don't. I feel like I don't. But I would say this: Matthew Stafford did not turn out to be as good as they told me he was. I know that, right? Matthew Stafford's been picked to be the number 1 pick in the draft and everything else since he was a junior in high school. It didn't work out it didn't work out in college the way people told me it was going to work out, and it didn't work out in the pros the way people told me. But he's been good. I don't want to say he has not been good. He's been good. After that, what are we talking about? Sam Bradford was the guy in 2010. Come on now. Cam Newton became, at his best, one of the best, most influential, most effective, like one-man force guys that we've ever seen. The other quarterbacks in that draft stunk. Andrew Luck got in and got out. Robert Griffin was in that draft, and the guy that stuck around from that 2012 draft of all people has turned out to be Kirk Cousins. Geno Smith, after being terrible or seeming terrible for nearly a decade, came around on the back end, and he finally panned out from 2013. 2014, what are we talking about? Teddy Bridgewater, right? 2015, Jameis Mariota. Right. 2015, James and Mariota. 2016, Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. And remember, Jared Goff was as bad as a rookie as any quarterback has ever been, and Carson Wentz is basically finished. 2017, I can't even remember who that one was.
2016 class randomly.
That's right. That's right. He came in the 4th round. But that's the draft that had Paxton Lynch in it.
Right. And the story about the Cowboys getting Dak is just, you will never find a team getting lucky like this back-to-back on franchise quarterbacks where it's a UDFA. And if for people who don't remember, with the Dak Prescott pick, they tried to trade up for Paxton Lynch. The Broncos snatched him before they could get him. And this was the final year in the NFL draft before you could trade compensatory picks. So if you had a compensatory picks in the 4th round, which the Cowboys did, you were locked in to take a player there. So they swung out. They also tried to get Connor Cook in that draft too.
Yes, they did.
And they swung out on Connor Cook because the Raiders got him. So they're sitting there with a pick they can't trade in the 4th round. They're like, fuck it. We'll just take Dak Prescott. And I'll look at them. That's not fair. I want that for my life.
Yep. Like that's, they got there by pure happenstance, right? But that, I just gave you a decade of quarterback wasteland where you look up in 2020 and none of those guys are there. Right? Andrew Luck has left the league by this point. Cam Newton has been battered into submission. He haven't out. He might as well have been out by 2020. He was in New England for that year. They were all gone. And so these young guys came in and filled it in. But now what are we going to be talking about? If the next set of young guys is going to have a longer adjustment period than we'd grown accustomed to, and maybe not even than we'd grown accustomed to, it took Josh Allen 2 years before he became an actual decent NFL quarterback, for example. But these 2021 guys, what's going on here? Including Trevor Lawrence, right? Generational prospect. What we talking about here? Like, this is going to be a really weird and interesting league. And I think what's going to have to happen is teams got to start running the ball again. The NFL is back, which means you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite teams only on Prize Picks. You can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on a couple of players' stats and projections, and you're locked in. So make sure you go to prizepicks.com/Bomani and use code Bomani for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/Bomani. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.